For the USA, that's the way to join us today from coast to coast. From sea to shining sea. Big news today, a case called Louisiana versus Calais. The Supreme Court rules that racist gerrymandering is unconstitutional. Not allowed to do it. Can't draw districts based on race, racial prejudice, and rigging our elections is the way Democrats have been trying to win. The Supreme Court today knocking that back. A huge win for decency with a deeper legal explanation for what we just witnessed. I want to welcome back to the program Hans von Spakovsky. He's a senior legal fellow with Advancing American Freedom, and he's got a long history in dealing with election law. Hans, great to have you on the show, sir.
Sure, thanks. Yeah, this was a terrific decision. And look, what the Supreme Court did is they upheld Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. That's what bans, racial discrimination in voting. But what they said was it can't be used for political purposes, because that's what's been happening in redistricting cases for quite a while. What they said was the only time you can actually use race in redistricting is if you can prove intentional racial discrimination was happening and you're remedying that. And most importantly, they said you can't use evidence of what was going on 50 or 100 years ago. You got to base it on current conditions, because that's what's been happening in a lot of these cases. And the other thing they said, and again, this is really important, is they warned courts when they're looking at evidence, they have to distinguish between race and politics. They have to disentangle the two. And the reason, Vince, they said that was because Democrats who've been upset about partisan redistricting, right? Republican legislatures drawing up districts to favor Republicans.
Yes.
They've been repackaging those as racial gerrymandering. And the fact that, 95% of blacks vote for the Democratic Party, that's not racial discrimination. That's based on party affiliation. So this, like I said, they upheld the law,
yes,
but they really limited its use, and that's a good thing.
Well, in Louisiana, what didn't the court basically force them to draw a map that divided a black community directly in half into two different districts in order to create black representation in both districts?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Look, Louisiana has 6 districts, and for years, decades actually, they've had one district that is a black majority district. Well, they were sued by folks saying, well, blacks are 1/3 of the population. Therefore, we're entitled to a second black district. And a court said, yep, that's right. You have to create a second black district. So Louisiana did that. The legislature did it. They got sued again, this time by different voters saying, you can't do that.
Right.
They didn't actually prove there's any racial discrimination going on in this state. They just based it on the proportion of the population. And what did you do? You used race to draw the lines. And the court today said, no, that's a violation of the Equal Protection Clause.
Yes.
And you can only use race, like I said, if you can prove current intentional racial discrimination.
So, I noticed in a number of stories we're looking at this week related to elections, Hans, that when you get rid of racial discrimination, Democrats lose power. And that's a kind of an interesting thing, because in this case, this opens up the state's ability to draw, all of the states to draw reasonable lines in their state without any consideration for race. The race is not supposed to be a part of this. In Texas, they just prevailed in a big court fight that culminated in the Supreme Court saying the new maps are good to go after the old maps were racially biased. And in Florida this week, you've got the governor, Ron DeSantis, saying he wants to redraw the maps because right now they're racially prejudiced. He wants to get rid of that, and it will redound to the benefit of Republicans when he does. I mean, Hans, am I missing something here? It feels like the pattern is racial prejudice leads to more Democrat power.
Well, it is, and in fact, the Babylon Bee actually is a great headline this afternoon because it's so true. Is the Supreme Court decision? The court finally tells Democrats they have to stop using race in redistricting, and that's exactly what's going on here.
Yeah, so not only do they talk about Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, in the majority opinion, we also get a reference to the 15th Amendment. because they say that really is the thing that the court has not really dealt with through the years, but they need to, because the constitutional requirement is you can't have your vote denied or abridged because of your skin color.
Right. And the reason that was important was the 15th Amendment prohibits intentional racial discrimination. But for years, progressives, liberals have been pushing the court and pushing lower courts to say that, oh, you don't have to show intentional discrimination. If there's a disparate impact, why, that's a violation of the law. And the Supreme Court said today, no, the Voting Rights Act was put in place to enforce the ban in the 15th Amendment, and you can't, it would be unconstitutional to change it from saying intentional discrimination is required to just disparate impact, which basically means there's no intentional discrimination involved. It might have the effect of impacting some voters more than others, but you can't interpret the 15th Amendment and therefore the VRA that way.
I mean, it's always seemed very poisonous to me to use racial discrimination as a means to end racial discrimination.
Right. Well, look, you're right. And remember, the Chief Justice himself, who joined this opinion by Alito a number of years ago, said the way to stop discrimination based on race is to stop discriminating on the basis of race.
It's remarkable. So if I add first of all, let's just talk about the direct impact as a political matter of a decision like this today. I've seen some projections that say up to 17 to 20 seats could be redrawn in such a way that Republicans have a huge advantage going into the midterms here. What are you predicting, or what are you sensing here, Hans von Spakovsky?
Well, that is if the states act, but remember, look, it's already the beginning of May, and you have primaries coming up. And even if states want to take advantage of this, like Florida, man, their legislatures are going to have to act extremely quickly. And despite the Supreme Court's decision, if, for example, Florida comes up with a new redistricting plan, you know they're going to get sued. And will the lawsuit delay those districts going into place? It could be. So if states want to have something in place for the midterm elections, they're going to have to act very quickly.
What do you make of the reporting advanced in part by Sean Spicer, former White House press secretary, that Elena Kagan dragged her feet on the dissent in order to prevent this decision from coming out until late in the Supreme Court cycle?
Oh, I believe that, because we've already got evidence, as you know, from the new book put out by Molly Hemingway, that she did the same thing in the decision that overturned Roe versus Wade, in the Dobbs decision. So that doesn't surprise me at all.
No. And then as far as the rest of these cases that are going on right now in Virginia, last week's attempts by the left to rig the map and steal 4 congressional seats, they look like they're not going well, Hans. It looks like the court is at least inclined to believe and to rule that the Democrats violated the state constitution the way they did that.
Yeah, look, if the judges on the state Supreme Court enforce the state's constitution, they will rule against the Democrats. You know, the main thing being you have to have an intervening election in between the two sessions where the legislature passes the referendum. And that didn't happen. You know, when they were passing the referendum, early voting had already started. So the general election hadn't intervened.
It's remarkable. Well, I'm encouraged by all of the developments, and I'm appreciative of your assessment as always. Hans von Spakovsky, thanks for your time today, sir.
Sure, thanks for having me.
That's Hans von Spakovsky with his legal analysis. A big Supreme Court decision today. Again, racial prejudice, verboten, forbidden, not allowed. Can't do that no more. And that hurts Democrats. More